Have you ever watched a premium live event where two matches almost carried the entire show on their backs? Because that's exactly how I felt walking away from WWE SummerSlam 2026 Night 2. This wasn't a bad show. It wasn't even a disappointing show. But if we're talking about what SummerSlam is supposed to represent, the second biggest event of WWE's calendar, then I don't think this reached that historic level. And today, we're going to break down every single match, one by one, using a scoring system that's a little different from what most wrestling channels do. Now, let's get into it. First, here's how the scoring works. There were 6 matches on the card, but they don't all contribute equally to the final score. 4 of the matches are worth 1.7 points each, while 2 matches are worth 1.6 points each, adding up to a maximum score of 10 out of 10 for the entire event. The 2 matches worth 1.6 points are Danhausen vs. Dominik Mysterio and Trick Williams vs. Baron Corbin. The remaining 4 matches are each worth 1.7 points. And one more important thing. I'm not judging this show based on crowd reactions, surprise returns, or shocking moments. Those things can certainly enhance a show, but they don't automatically make the wrestling better. Instead, every match is evaluated using 4 equally weighted criteria: physical execution, how well the wrestlers performed inside the ring; pacing and structure, how effectively the match was built from start to finish; psychology, whether the in-ring story made sense and stayed consistent; and finally, booking, the creative decisions behind the match and whether those decisions actually benefited the product moving forward. With that out of the way, let's start with the opener. The first match of the night was Danhausen vs. Dominik Mysterio. This was easily the most divisive match on the entire card. Now, to give it credit where it's due, it absolutely served its purpose as comic relief after a weekend packed with championship matches and serious storylines. Dominik Mysterio continues to prove that he completely understands sports entertainment. He knows exactly how to work a crowd, when to lean into comedy, and how to make his character entertaining without needing to wrestle a technical masterpiece every single night. Danhausen also got exactly the kind of audience reaction you'd expect. His unique character connected with the crowd, and the fans were clearly having fun throughout the match. So, from an entertainment standpoint, it worked. However, this is also where the biggest criticism comes in. For me, this match completely disrupted the tone of SummerSlam. A show like SummerSlam should feel important from beginning to end. Absurd comedy stipulations and over-the-top humor can absolutely work on weekly television, but on one of WWE's biggest premium live events of the year, they inevitably make the overall card feel less prestigious. Looking strictly at the wrestling itself, there just wasn't much serious in-ring action. There were too many comedy spots. The psychology was almost non-existent. And perhaps most importantly, the match never created the feeling that these two competitors were actually fighting to win. Now, that doesn't automatically make it a bad match. It was trying to accomplish something completely different. I've definitely seen much worse wrestling matches than this. So no, I'm not going to give it a 0 simply because it wasn't designed to be a traditional wrestling contest. But at the same time, I don't think it came anywhere close to the standard I expect from SummerSlam. So my score is 0.9 out of 1.6 possible points. Some people will probably say that's too generous. Personally, I think it's fair. Moving on. We had Sami Zayn vs. Finn Bálor, with the winner earning the #1 contender spot for the Undisputed Championship. And honestly, I think this was probably the most underrated match of the entire night. From a technical standpoint, both men reminded everyone why they're among WWE's most reliable performers. The timing was excellent. The selling consistently elevated the offense. And the transitions between offensive sequences felt incredibly smooth. Nothing looked forced. Nothing felt rushed. Finn Bálor once again demonstrated something he's been doing for years. He has an incredible ability to elevate a match regardless of whether he wins or loses. Meanwhile, Sami Zayn brought the emotional connection that only a handful of WWE performers can consistently create. The audience stayed invested because Sami knows how to make every comeback feel meaningful. That said, the match wasn't without flaws. And those flaws had much more to do with creative direction than with the wrestlers themselves. For several stretches of the match, there was never a genuine sense of uncertainty about who was going to win. The booking almost telegraphed which competitor needed the victory to maintain momentum. That predictability hurt the suspense. I also felt the closing stretch never quite reached that unforgettable level. The near falls were good, but they never truly convinced me the match could end at any second. So while this was a very good wrestling match, I don't think it crossed into great territory. My score is 1.25 out of 1.7 possible points. Next up, we had Trick Williams defending the United States Championship against Baron Corbin. This is probably the match where my opinion will differ from a lot of fans. There were definitely positives. The intensity was solid throughout. Baron Corbin wrestled with noticeably more aggression than we've seen from him in previous years, which made his offense feel more believable. And Trick Williams once again showed why WWE continues to invest in him. His charisma remains one of his biggest strengths, and even when the match slowed down, his presence kept the audience engaged. Unfortunately, the match itself never found that second gear. It felt conventional almost from start to finish. The structure remained very predictable. Several sequences started to feel repetitive. And while the title change certainly came as a surprise, I don't think the storytelling leading into that finish was strong enough to fully justify it. Now, if WWE has a major long-term plan for Baron Corbin as United States Champion, then this decision could eventually make a lot more sense. But judging this match on its own merits, it simply didn't reach the level I'd expect from a SummerSlam Championship match. Because of that, I'm giving it 1.0 out of 1.6 possible points. And honestly, I think that's the fairest score I can give it. Now, if the first half of the show was a little inconsistent, this is where SummerSlam really started to find its footing. Because the next match wasn't just good. It was the most technically accomplished wrestling match of the entire night. I'm talking about Penta defending the Intercontinental Championship against Chad Gable. From the opening exchange, it was obvious these two had a completely different objective from the rest of the card. They weren't trying to rely on spectacle. They weren't chasing viral moments. They simply wanted to wrestle. And they delivered. The execution was about as close to flawless as you could realistically ask for. Every movement had purpose. Every transition flowed naturally into the next sequence. Nothing felt rushed, and nothing overstayed its welcome. One of the biggest strengths of this match was the chain wrestling. It wasn't there just to impress the audience. It became part of the story. The psychology centered around Gable's technical approach and his constant attacks on Penta's arm, forcing Penta to adjust his offense as the match progressed. That's the kind of storytelling I always appreciate. Instead of throwing out move after move with no connection between them, both wrestlers built a narrative inside the ring. Another thing I really liked was the pacing. The intensity increased naturally as the match went on, but without falling into the trap of endless false finishes. Too many modern main event style matches rely on kicking out of multiple finishers just to manufacture drama. This one didn't need that. The drama came from the wrestling itself. Penta looked every bit like a fighting champion. Meanwhile, Chad Gable reminded everyone why so many people consider him one of the very best technical wrestlers on WWE's roster. And according to The Sun, Gable's championship victory carried even more emotional weight because he celebrated the moment in front of his hometown crowd, making the title change feel genuinely meaningful rather than simply surprising. Now, was the match perfect? Not quite. If I had one criticism, it's that I honestly wanted more. Give these two another 5 minutes, and I genuinely believe they could have produced an all-time SummerSlam classic. That's a rare criticism to make because it means the match was so good that it left you wanting even more. My score is 1.5 out of 1.7 possible points. From one outstanding wrestling match to complete chaos. Next, we had the Women's Interim Championship ladder match. And for the most part, this delivered exactly what a ladder match is supposed to deliver. If you're expecting jaw-dropping moments, creative ladder spots, and memorable visuals, you got them. The wrestlers used the ladders effectively instead of treating them like random props. Everyone had opportunities to contribute. Nobody completely disappeared from the match for long stretches. And visually, this was one of the strongest presentations of the night. There were several sequences that looked fantastic on camera and gave the audience the kind of spectacle you'd expect from SummerSlam. Then came what was arguably the biggest surprise of night 2. Chelsea Green walked away with the victory. According to The Sun, that title win was arguably the biggest shock result on the entire card. So, from a surprise standpoint, mission accomplished. However, this is where the match started to lose some points for me. And to be fair, these aren't problems unique to this particular match. They're common issues in multi-person ladder matches. There were several moments where you could clearly see wrestlers waiting for the next plan sequence. Sometimes they remained down for just a little too long. Other times, you could practically see someone standing in position, waiting to take the next big spot. Those moments inevitably pull you out of the illusion. Even more importantly, I still have major reservations about the very existence of an interim women's championship. That's not a criticism of the wrestlers. They worked hard and delivered the kind of match WWE asked them to have. My issue is entirely with the creative direction. Interim championships often create unnecessary confusion and can dilute the prestige of a division instead of strengthening it. That's a booking problem, not an in-ring problem. Because of those factors, I'm giving this match 1.3 out of 1.7 possible points. And finally, we arrived at the main event. Roman Reigns defending the World Heavyweight Championship against Seth Rollins. This wasn't simply the biggest match on the card. It was the emotional centerpiece of the entire show. What immediately stood out to me was that this wasn't a match built around doing as many spectacular moves as possible. Instead, it was built around history. Every callback mattered. Every pause had meaning. Every facial expression added another layer to a rivalry that's been evolving for well over a decade. Both men repeatedly referenced their shared history in the Shield without needing constant commentary to explain it. If you followed WWE over the years, you understood exactly what those moments represented. That's effective storytelling. The selling remained consistent throughout. Neither wrestler abandoned the damage they had taken simply to rush into the next sequence. The pace was deliberately measured, allowing the tension to build naturally before the bigger moments arrived. That patience paid off. Roman Reigns delivered what I honestly believe was one of his strongest performances since WrestleMania XL. His confidence, timing, and control of the audience were exceptional. On the other side, Seth Rollins once again proved why he's one of the most adaptable performers in modern wrestling. No matter who his opponent is, he always finds a way to complement their style instead of forcing the match to revolve around himself. That's one of the qualities that separates great wrestlers from elite ones. Then we reached the finish. According to the Times of India, Roman Reigns' victory brought logical closure to one of WWE's defining rivalries while reinforcing his championship reign in a way that felt earned rather than forced. I completely understand that perspective. The ending fit the story. It respected the history. And it gave the rivalry a conclusion that felt emotionally satisfying. Now, I do have one criticism. The closing stretch leaned a little too heavily on repeated finisher exchanges. Did it completely ruin the immersion? No. But it came very close to crossing that line where dramatic escalation starts feeling excessive rather than organic. Even so, that small issue wasn't enough to significantly lower my opinion of what was, in my view, the best narrative match of the entire event. So my final score for the main event is 1.6 out of 1.7 possible points. Just slightly higher than Penta vs. Chad Gable. Not because it was technically superior, but because its storytelling, emotional investment, and long-term narrative gave it an edge that only a rivalry like Roman Reigns versus Seth Rollins can achieve. So, after breaking down every single match individually, it's time to answer the biggest question. Did SummerSlam 2026 Night 2 actually live up to the expectations of WWE's second biggest event of the year? For me, the answer is yes. But only to a certain extent. This was a very good premium live event. It just wasn't a legendary one. Let's start with what worked. The biggest strength of the entire show was unquestionably the main event. Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins delivered exactly what a championship rivalry with more than a decade of history should look like. It wasn't just about big moves, it was about telling a story that rewarded long-term viewers while still feeling compelling in the moment. Right behind it was Penta versus Gable. From a pure wrestling perspective, I genuinely believe that was the best technical match of the night. The execution, the psychology, the pacing, everything clicked. If someone asked me which match I'd recommend purely for in-ring quality, that's the one I'd point them toward. Another positive was WWE's overall television production. The presentation felt polished throughout the night. The camera work, entrances, lighting, and overall production value continued to reinforce why WWE remains the industry leader when it comes to presenting major events. I also thought the championship changes helped refresh the landscape. Whether every booking decision ultimately proves successful remains to be seen, but the show certainly avoided feeling predictable from start to finish. And according to the Times of India, one of the show's biggest strengths was its consistently solid pacing, with very few noticeable dead spots between matches. I think that's a fair observation. The event moved forward at a steady pace and never really dragged for an extended period of time. Now, let's talk about where the show fell short. The opening comedy match between Danhausen and Dominik Mysterio simply didn't feel like the right fit for a SummerSlam card. Again, I don't think it was a bad match. But opening one of WWE's biggest shows of the year with a contest built primarily around comedy immediately lowered the sense of importance. Then there's the United States Championship match. It wasn't bad either. It just felt ordinary. For a championship match on a stage like SummerSlam, solid isn't really enough. You expect another gear, another level of intensity, another memorable sequence, and unfortunately, that never arrived. I'm also still not convinced by the concept of an interim women's championship. That's a criticism aimed squarely at WWE creative, not at the wrestlers themselves. The performers delivered exactly what they were asked to do. The issue is that interim championships tend to create unnecessary confusion and, in my opinion, reduce the prestige of a title instead of enhancing it. And finally, I think the overall perception of this show depended a little too heavily on two outstanding matches. Without Penta versus Gable and Roman Reigns versus Seth Rollins, this card would have looked significantly weaker. Those two matches elevated the entire event. The rest ranged from decent to very good. But they never consistently reached that same level of excellence. So, let's calculate the final score. Remember, this review isn't based on crowd reactions or surprise moments. It's based on physical execution, pacing and structure, psychology, and booking. Here's how every match scored. Danhausen versus Dominik Mysterio, 0.9 out of 1.6. Sami Zayn versus Bálor, 1.25 out of 1.7. Trick Williams versus Baron Corbin, 1.0 out of 1.6. Penta versus Gable, 1.5 out of 1.7. Women's Interim Championship Ladder Match, 1.3 out of 1.7. Roman Reigns versus Seth Rollins, 1.6 out of 1.7. That brings my overall score for WWE SummerSlam 2026 Night 2 to 7.5 out of 10. A strong recommendation. But not a masterpiece. This wasn't a disappointing SummerSlam. It was a great premium live event that fell just short of becoming one of the truly unforgettable editions. Two exceptional matches carried the prestige of the show. The rest of the card ranged from perfectly acceptable to genuinely enjoyable, but it never consistently reached that elite level from top to bottom. And honestly, that's perfectly okay. Not every SummerSlam has to redefine professional wrestling. Sometimes delivering a very good show is enough. Now I want to hear from you. Do you agree with my 7.5 out of 10? Was Roman Reigns vs. Seth Rollins your match of the night? Or do you think Penta vs. Chad Gable was the true standout? And did I score any match too high? Or too low? Let me know your ratings for every match down in the comments. Thanks for watching. And I'll see you in the next one.